The morning my brother's lawyer called, I was standing in my kitchen making oatmeal, still in my robes, still half asleep. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the garbage truck was making its rounds outside, that familiar rumble and clank, and I'd been about to take out the recycling when the phone rang. "Mrs. Harmon," the lawyer said. "I'm calling on behalf of the estate of Theodore Harmon." My brother. Teddy. I had to sit down. Teddy and I hadn't spoken much in the last few years. Not because of any falling out, but because life had gotten in the way it always does. He'd moved to Boise after he retired. I was still in Columbus, and phone calls kept getting shorter and shorter until they were mostly just birthday texts and forwarded photos of his garden. He'd grown the most extraordinary tomatoes. He always sent pictures of them like proud parents send pictures of their kids. He'd died of a heart attack 6 weeks earlier. Quietly, in his sleep, his neighbor found him. I'd driven out for the funeral and come back home, feeling hollowed out in that particular way you feel when someone who knew you as a child is gone. Teddy was the last one who remembered our mother's voice, the last one who knew the same version of me that I used to be. I hadn't known about the will. I hadn't asked. "He left everything to you," the lawyer said. "The house, the investment accounts, the savings. The total value as of last month's assessment is approximately $4.3 million. I didn't say anything for a long moment. "Mrs. Harmon? I'm here," I said. "I'm sorry." "Say that again." He said it again. I sat there in my kitchen robe with my oatmeal going cold and I cried, not because of the money, because of Teddy, because he'd trusted me with all of it. Everything he'd spent 40 years building. Quietly, modestly, in a little house in Idaho with tomato plants in the backyard. And I hadn't even known. My daughter called that evening. She must have seen I'd been crying when we did our weekly video call because she asked right away what was wrong. "Nothing's wrong," I said. "Actually, something happened, something I need to tell you in person." She drove over the following Saturday. My son-in-law dropped her off. They only lived 40 minutes away. And she came in with that energy she has, coat half off before she's through the door already talking. She'd brought a coffee cake from the bakery she knows I like, the one with the almond glaze. I thought, in that moment, I have such a good daughter. We sat at the kitchen table and I told her. I watched her face as I explained. The lawyer's call, Teddy's will, the number. Her expression went through something I couldn't quite name, surprise, certainly, a kind of stillness that came over her, and then warmth or what looked like warmth. She reached across the table and took my hands. "Mom," she said, "that's incredible. Teddy must have loved you so much." "He did," I said, "and I loved him." She stayed for 3 hours. We talked about Teddy, about old memories, about what I might do with the money. I told her I hadn't decided anything yet, that I wanted to take my time, that I was still grieving, and it didn't feel real. She nodded along to everything. She seemed genuinely caring, present. I drove home from dropping her at the corner feeling like maybe the grief was a little lighter. I should have known something was off when she started calling every day. My daughter and I had always been close, but we were also both women who respected each other's space. We had our weekly call, occasional visits, holidays together. That was our rhythm. But starting the week after I told her about the inheritance, she was calling in the mornings before I'd had my coffee, texting me links to articles about estate planning and financial advisors, stopping by with groceries I hadn't asked for. "You just seem overwhelmed," she told me one afternoon. "I'm worried about you. You've been alone since Dad died, and now all this with Teddy. And, Mom, have you been sleeping? You look tired." I told her I was fine. I told her I was sleeping perfectly well. But I started to notice other things. Small things that didn't add up until they did. She asked me, very casually, whether I'd found a financial advisor yet. When I said I was going to ask my friend from church for a recommendation, she said she'd already done some research and had a name for me. Someone she'd heard good things about. She mentioned this person 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. When I finally looked the name up online, I found almost nothing. No website, no reviews, barely a footprint. She started asking detailed questions about my health, not in the way you ask about your mother's health when you love her. in the way someone asks when they're building a case. Had I been to the doctor lately? Was I still sharp with numbers? Did I ever have trouble remembering things? Once, during a visit, she picked up a prescription bottle from my counter, just a blood pressure medication I'd been on for years, and stood there reading the label for a long moment before setting it back down without a word. I noticed. I said nothing. Then came the Tuesday I heard it. I'd driven over to her house to drop off a casserole dish I'd borrowed at Christmas and forgotten to return. I had my own key. She'd given it to me years ago for emergencies, and I knocked twice, didn't hear anything, and let myself in. I could hear voices from the back of the house. Her husband's home office door was slightly open. I assumed they were on a phone call together, some work thing, and I set the dish on the counter and was about to call out to let them know I was there. That's when I heard my name. "She won't even notice," my daughter was saying. "She's 67. She lives alone. We document a few things, get the right doctor involved, and by the time anyone questions it, we'll already have control of the account." I stood very still. Her husband's voice, "And the will?" "We get conservatorship first. Once that's established, she won't be able to make any major financial decisions without our approval. The lawyer said it's harder to contest an asset transfer when there's documented cognitive decline. What if she contests it herself?" My daughter made a sound, a laugh, almost, that I had never heard from her before. "She's 67 and she's on her own. Who's she going to call?" I don't know how long I stood there, long enough that my hands went cold, long enough to hear a few more details, the name of the doctor she planned to approach, a timeline of some kind, something about my driving habits being a good starting point. Long enough to understand, with complete and terrible clarity, that the person I had raised, the little girl I had sat with through fevers and heartbreaks, and the first terrible months after her father died, was now sitting in the next room, calmly planning how to have me declared incompetent so she could take the money my brother had left me. I walked out of that house without making a sound. I got into my car. I drove to the parking lot of a grocery store 3 blocks away, and I sat there for a very long time. I am not the kind of woman who panics. I worked as an office manager for 22 years. I raised 2 kids mostly on my own after my husband got sick. I have dealt with difficult things and I have gotten through them by being steady and quiet and thinking things through. So that is what I did. The first thing I did was not call her. I did not call her or text her or show up at her house. I acted in every interaction for the next several weeks like I had heard nothing. I was warm. I was a little scattered, maybe. I mentioned forgetting where I'd put my glasses once or twice. I let her worry about me. The second thing I did was call my younger son. He lives in Portland now, has for 15 years. We talk on the phone every Sunday. He is steadier than his sister, quieter, someone who doesn't say much until he's thought things through. I told him everything. I told him what I had heard, word for word, as best as I could remember it. I told him about the financial advisor she'd pushed on me, the questions about my health, the prescription bottle. There was a long silence on his end. "Mom," he finally said, "we need to get you a lawyer." Not my daughter's lawyer, not anyone she had ever heard of. My son researched 3 estate attorneys in Columbus, and we chose one together. A woman who specialized in elder law and who had, according to her reviews, seen situations like this before. I drove to her office on a Wednesday morning and told her everything. She didn't seem surprised. That was the thing that shook me most. She didn't seem surprised at all. She explained what conservatorship meant, how the process worked, what my daughter would need to do to initiate it. She explained that the best thing I could do was document everything. The conversations I remembered, the dates of the phone calls, the name of the doctor my daughter had mentioned, the financial advisor she'd pushed. She told me to write it all down as soon as I got home, while it was still fresh. She also suggested something I hadn't thought of. "Do you have any reason to believe she may try to contact your medical providers directly?" she asked. I thought about the prescription bottle. "Maybe," I said. "Then you should notify your doctor's office immediately." Put a note in your file that no one is authorized to request your medical records without your written consent. That's a safeguard. I did it that same afternoon. Over the next 3 weeks, I quietly moved most of my liquid assets into an account my daughter didn't know about. A process my attorney guided me through carefully, making sure everything was properly documented and legitimate. I updated my power of attorney. I changed the emergency contacts on my medical records. I wrote out a detailed statement of what I had witnessed, dated, and signed, and left a copy with my attorney and a copy with my son. I also, and I know this sounds extreme, told my neighbor. She is a retired school teacher named Gwen, and she has known me for 11 years, and she agreed without hesitation to be someone I could call if I ever felt I was being followed or pressured, or if anything seemed wrong. My daughter, all this time, kept calling, kept visiting. She brought me soup once. She brought me a book she thought I'd like. I received all of it graciously. I asked her how my grandchildren were doing. I showed her some photos from Teddy's funeral that I'd had printed, and she looked at them and said how much she'd always liked him, and I watched her face and felt something I don't have a word for. The moment the situation changed was a Thursday in February. I'd been scheduled to meet with my regular doctor for a routine checkup. When I arrived, the receptionist told me, slightly apologetically, that there was something she needed to mention. "A woman called last week saying she was your daughter," she said. "She asked about getting copies of your cognitive assessments. We didn't release anything because of the flag on your file, but I thought you should know." I thanked her. I sat in the waiting room for 10 minutes before my appointment, and I focused on breathing. I called my attorney from the parking lot after. "That's the documentation we needed," she said. "That's attempted unauthorized access to your medical records. We can move forward." What happened next took about 2 months and was not simple. My attorney filed a formal complaint with the state medical board about the unauthorized records request. She contacted the financial advisor my daughter had recommended and, through a series of letters, determined that he had no fiduciary certification and had, in fact, already been subject to a complaint from another family in a similar situation. She compiled everything: my written statement, the records request documentation, a timeline of my daughter's behavior and communications, and presented it to my son, who had flown in from Portland by that point. We sat in my attorney's office together, my son and I, and she walked us through our options. I didn't want to destroy my daughter. I want to be honest about that. Even then, even after everything, there was a part of me that kept circling back to the little girl who used to climb into bed with me during thunderstorms, who called me from her college dorm crying over nothing, who stood beside me at her father's graveside and held my hand so hard it hurt. I kept thinking about that person and trying to reconcile her with the woman I had heard in that back room, but I also thought about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that house that afternoon. If I had trusted her. If I had let her help me find a financial advisor, let her worry over me until I seemed confused, let her bring me to a doctor she'd already spoken to. I thought about where I would be now. My attorney advised me that I had grounds to pursue legal action, but that I could also choose a formal confrontation with documentation as a deterrent. Making clear to my daughter that I knew everything, that it was all documented, and that any further attempt to interfere with my finances or my medical care would result in the second options. My son recommended the second option first. "Give her the chance to understand what she did," he said, "and what it cost her." We arranged to meet at my house. My attorney was present. My son flew in and sat beside me. When my daughter walked in and saw my son and a woman she didn't recognize sitting at my kitchen table, she stopped in the doorway. Something shifted in her face. I watched it happen, the calculation, the recalibration. "Mom," she started. "What is this?" I told her to sit down. I told her everything I knew. I told her the date I had walked into her house and what I had heard. I told her about the medical records request, about the uncertified financial advisor, about the documented timeline my attorney had compiled. I spoke as calmly as I could, and I only stopped once, near the middle of it, because my voice started to do something I didn't want it to do. She tried, at first, to explain, to reframe, to tell me I had misunderstood. Her husband wasn't even there. She'd come alone, and without him in the room, her composure started to come apart in a way I hadn't expected. She started to cry. She said she'd been scared for me. She said she was worried about the money and what might happen to it, that she'd only wanted to help, that she didn't mean. My attorney, very quietly, placed the transcript of the medical records request on the table. My daughter stopped talking. There was a long silence. Outside, I could hear a cardinal in the tree by the window. Teddy used to say cardinals were good luck. Here is what happens now, my attorney said. You do not contact Mrs. Harmon's medical providers. You do not recommend financial services or advisors to her. You do not initiate or assist any process related to her cognitive or financial competency. If any of that changes, the documentation we have compiled will be submitted to the district attorney's office and to Adult Protective Services. My daughter looked at me across the table. Mom, she said. Her voice was very small. I'm so sorry. I looked back at her for a long moment. I thought about Teddy, who had trusted me with everything. I thought about the Thursday afternoons she used to spend at my house after school while I finished work, doing homework at the kitchen table, eating crackers and peanut butter because she was always hungry at 4 o'clock. I thought about how much I had loved being her mother. I know you are, I said. But I need you to understand that sorry doesn't undo what I heard. It doesn't undo the phone call to my doctor. You made a decision, and I don't know how to go back from that the same way I came. She left without the coffee cake she'd brought. She'd set it on the counter when she walked in. That same bakery, almond glaze again, like things were normal, and she didn't take it when she went. My son stayed for the rest of the week. We drove out one afternoon to a nursery and I bought 4 tomato plants for the backyard, the kind Teddy used to grow. My son helped me get them in the ground, and we stood there afterward with dirty hands, and I told him some stories about his uncle that he'd never heard. He laughed at the right parts. It's been 8 months now. My daughter and I have spoken twice, briefly, carefully. I don't know what we are to each other anymore. I suspect that will take a very long time to find out, if we find out at all. What I do know is this. I am 67 years old and I live alone, and I am not confused or diminished or in need of managing. I know my own mind. I know where I put my glasses. I grieve my brother by growing his tomatoes, and I trust my son. And I sit on my back porch in the evenings when the light is good, and I feel something that is not quite peace but is pointed in that direction. Teddy left me everything he had because he trusted me to handle it. I'm going to honor that. Every single day.